Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Man, it feels so good to be here. Last night, putting the kids to bed, the boys especially, they always want to ask what's next, what's happening tomorrow. And I was like, guys, tomorrow we'll be able to finally go back to, they call it Shabbat church. So I'll be like, we'll be able to finally go back to Shabbat church. And Asher's literally like this, yes! He was so excited. I have the honor of sharing the Torah portion with you guys today. The Torah portion for this week was Mishpatim, which is translated to judgment or ordinances or assessments of God. And it's found in Exodus 21 verses, or the first chapter, 21 through chapter 24. This portion was just filled with regulations and rules and commandments and ordinances. And it started with laws for servitude. God gave commandments for, I feel like it's something that nowadays we don't really understand, that the rules and laws surrounding the cultural of indentured servitude. And so God goes through that at the beginning of the portion. And then he goes through the laws and penalties for murder and manslaughter and kidnapping. It also shows God's value of life is very evident in this portion, especially as it pertains to a pregnant woman, but also the life that she's carrying, where it says if someone strikes a pregnant lady and she is carrying a child, and if there's no harm, then they just have to deal with the repercussions with the lady. But if there is, that's where verses 23 and 24 say that if there is harm, then you shall pay a life for a life, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, hand for a hand, foot for a foot, burn for a burn, a wound for a wound, and stripe for a stripe, which really shows God's just the value that God puts on life, even in the womb. I thought that was amazing seeing that in the portion. And it continues, God talks about oxes and cattle and first offense and second offense, and it even is applicable for animals. And then it continues with the portion, the loss of restitution and reparation. And it's really awesome seeing that God's justice throughout Scripture, especially when it comes to righting wrongs, is a restorative justice that doesn't just seem to cover what was done, but it actually, God asks for more to be done to kind of restore and repair what was there. So, which also is a disadvantage to those that commit crime, because like if in this portion there was examples of like if someone steals one sheep and they're caught, they got to repay 4 sheep. If they stole 1 ox, they have to repay 5 ox. So like looking at this, I'm like, it definitely didn't pay to be a thief back then, because unless you're really sneaky, obviously, but you would have to repay, and just like that, you'd be 5 oxen down. And God takes it through social justice as well in this portion. Goes through the man seducing the virgin and everything that he has to do at that point, and then he goes through the mistreatment of foreigners, of widows and orphans, which are big, something that God definitely does not approve of. And it also goes in the portion through the care, God's care of the poor. In verse 31, for me, was a quick reminder also where God kind of talks about not eating animals that have been torn. And this really gave me a time to reflect and remind me, because I feel like a lot of times when it comes to God's kosher laws or food, ordinances, I feel like it's usually for me, I think about the health benefits, I think about, just what it is for my body, but sometimes I forget that the number one reason that God gave those ordinances for eating according to God's, God's plan is really an aspect of holiness for God and his people. And his first and foremost reason for these ordinances are a matter of sanctifying ourselves to him. And for me, I feel like that was a really good reminder, because sometimes I get so bogged down with, checking the ingredients list or just the I feel like the extra step needed for things like that. But then I look back and I think about the reason God put this and see it from his point of view. It is to sanctify us and set us apart as a holy people for himself. And that was a really good reminder for me in this section as well. Chapter 23 continues with very specific ordinances covering lying and the perverting of the justice system, to the treatment of enemy property. And then he also takes and reminds his people of the importance of resting and sanctifying on his Shabbat, as well as all the ordinances surrounding his festivals, Jubilee, the year of Jubilee, as well as the harvest feasts. And then the chapter ends with God's promise of Canaan's conquest, which leads us to the final chapter, 24, which is a spectacular confirmation of God confirming the covenant that he made with his people, where God calls Moses back up to the mountain, and it's just an amazing scene where the glory of the Lord is like a devouring fire that everyone could see, and Moses got to basically hang out with God for 40 days and 40 nights up there, as God confirmed the covenant. So that was the portion, but for me, what moved me the most throughout this Torah portion was just God's specific and meticulous love and care for us. Like the songs that we've been saying have been really just, recently I feel like God has been really revealing to me just his love for me and how he sees me, like almost like allowing me to see myself the way he sees me. It's been just moving. But in this portion specifically, there are 53 total ordinances. I think it was 30 negative ones and 23 positive ones. But all of them, including all the ones in the previous Torah portion and following, are very specific and meticulous, but they're all for our benefit. They're all commandments, regulations, and ordinances that God gave to set us apart so that our relationships would flourish with one another, our relationship with him would flourish, so that we would succeed, and that's so we can bring honor and praise to his name, obviously. But they were given primarily because he loves us. And I see this evident and playing out in my life personally with my children, and specifically Zuri comes to mind recently just because she's our 19-month-old. She's like 100% convinced that she's invincible, I feel like, right now. So she, started with our coffee table. She would get up on it, and at first we were like, oh, no. And then slowly we're like, okay, we'll watch. And then she stands up, and as she was trying to get her balance, she also would do like things like this on it, and we'd be like, no. But we moved it away, and she would cry, and she would want it. And then it moved now to where she has this chair, this huge, heavy chair that I don't even know how she carries it. But she like grabs it from the computer and drags it around the house anywhere she wants just to climb on stuff. Like today, before church, I actually caught her, like she pulled it all the way to the kitchen cabinets and was on top of and opened up a kitchen cabinet, standing up. It was insane. But it's crazy because her reactions to like the way that we're trying to train her, like, no, you can fall, or even if she falls, because she has fallen off like the bar stools at our island, and she'll cry. But her reactions every time is, I want to keep doing it, So the way she responds to our rules and our ordinances are like she feels like we're no fun. We don't let her do anything. And she does understand, with her 18-month-old brain that this is for her own good. We're denying this pleasure, I guess, for her, like just the rise of being high or whatever it is. But for her, she doesn't understand it. From her perspective, we come across as tyrants and limiting. But our motivation and for our guidance and rules, whether it's for Zuri or all of our children, are birthed out of love, and are birthed out of us wanting everything for their good and their protection. And it's something that as they grow up, like Mariah, obviously now as an 8-year-old, understands, and as she understands, she's able to heed and she's able to see, you're saying no to this because there's a greater reason for it, and it's for my benefit. So as we get older, that's how it is. But for me, seeing it reflected like that, first of all, from God's point of view, really was enlightening to me and encouraging for me to be able to mimic his love, mimic his guidance, mimic his grace towards us, to my children. But as God's children, we also face the same predicament on a daily basis where he is giving us guidances and rules and ordinances and judgments that are solely for our good. They're birthed out of his love, and so that our relationships with him and those around us would flourish so that we can be his prized and sanctified people. But what is our reaction usually? Sometimes we react like Zuri does, where we, even though we know that he is God and is for our good, we still react that way. Something sobering I read yesterday in a devotional that I usually read every morning by Oswald Chambers. It's something that I think Autumn, actually, when we first started dating, told me about, and I've been reading it. I still read it every day. My utmost for his highest. Yesterday, something he said in there is that we don't consciously and deliberately disobey God as Christians, that we simply don't listen to him. God has given his commands to us, but we pay no attention to them, not because of willful disobedience, but because we do not truly love and respect him. And that was it was very, very sobering to hear that, because it's putting it like it is, because God does say, Yeshua says in John 14:15, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. So it is love, our love for him, that causes us to realize that his commandments are his love for us. So in this portion, it really got me to think, what is my response? Do I trust my own assessments and my own judgments and ordinances? Or do I trust him, or do I set him aside for myself and my own ways? Do I trust his ways, or do we lean on our own understanding? So this portion really just motivated me, and I like to motivate you guys the same, that our response would be one just laced with gratitude and love and complete self-denial, knowing that we are listening and following the voice of the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, King Yeshua. So I hope that was an encouragement to you guys. Thank you.